Aristotle wants to find out how people can lead a good and flourishing life. For him, a good life is a virtuous life. In the last video, we used Aristotle's model of the soul to examine the significance of the rational faculty of the soul for the development of the virtues. The focus was on the Dianoetic virtues. Today, we take a closer look at the ethical virtues or character virtues. But first, a small step back. What exactly does Aristotle mean by virtue? Virtue, from the Greek arete, can also be translated as efficiency, goodness, excellence, or best condition. According to Aristotle, a thing is good if it fulfills its ergon, its specific task or function. For example, a knife is good if it cuts well. The specific function, the ergon, of the knife is to cut. The specific function of man, his ergon, is reason. Man acts and lives well when he lives according to his specific function, that is, when he is guided by his reason. Arete, virtue, being good, consists in listening to reason. All virtues are therefore related to reason. We already know that the Dianoetic virtues are purely intellectual virtues that are acquired through teaching. The ethical virtues or character virtues, on the other hand, arise through education, practice, and habituation. The Dianoetic virtue of practical wisdom plays a very special role in the development of the ethical virtues. This is because practical wisdom can influence human affects and thus exert an influence on the sensitive soul faculty, which is devoid of reason. Ethical virtues can develop when the sensitive faculty of the soul listens to reason. But what are ethical virtues? The ethical virtues are, by their nature, an attitude, condition, or mindset. Those who live from an attitude or mindset do not act by chance or out of a certain mood, but because this action has become part of their personality, their character. According to Aristotle, there is a natural disposition towards the virtues of character or ethical virtues. However, the actual virtues must be learned, not through teaching or instruction like the Dianoetic virtues, but through education, practice, and habituation. Virtues are acquired against inner resistance. You have to find the right balance in relation to your affects. Reason, or more precisely practical wisdom, must control the affects. The purpose of education is to feel pleasure in the good and displeasure in the bad. We can tell whether we have acted well or virtuously by the reactions of our fellow human beings. In this way, bad behavior can be noticed and corrected. Aristotle emphasizes that virtue is only available to those who enjoy doing the right thing. Virtues must be practiced and increasingly internalized. Just action makes you just. Courageous action makes you courageous, in short. Virtuous, good action makes you virtuous. The Greek term for this is eupraxia, good action. Ethical virtues are only formed through good action, eupraxia. And according to Aristotle, you are only a virtuous person when you have really become accustomed to acting correctly or virtuously. Once a person has become accustomed to acting correctly, that is, has developed a correct attitude, an ethical virtue, then practical wisdom is no longer necessary for correct action. People then automatically act correctly or virtuously. He is then a virtuous person. Aristotle defines the ethical virtues according to their nature as a mean. In Greek, mean or middle means mesotes, which is why Aristotle's doctrine of virtue is also called the doctrine of mesotes. According to Aristotle, virtue always aims for the golden mean between two extremes, excess and deficiency. Virtue is therefore the golden mean between the extremes of excess and deficiency. However, this is not a mathematical or objective mean, but a relative or subjective mean. It is a mean for us that varies from person to person and from situation to situation. This mean in relation to us must be determined in each individual case. This determination is not so easy. Aristotle explains that it is much more difficult to do right than wrong. For what is right is limited, but what is wrong is unlimited. There are many ways of doing wrong, but only one way of doing right. Moreover, what is right depends on the person and the situation and must be judged accordingly. The virtue of practical wisdom helps us to find the golden mean. Once a person has become accustomed to acting virtuously, practical wisdom is no longer necessary. The Dianoetic virtue of practical wisdom is transformed into the various ethical virtues through practice and habituation. However, If practical wisdom misses the right mean and always hits one of the extremes, then man does not develop a virtue, but a vice. Let us first get an overview of the various ethical virtues that Aristotle mentions in his Nicomachean Ethics. As just explained, virtue is the golden mean between excess and deficiency. The virtue of courage is the mean between the false extremes of cowardice and rashness. The virtue of temperance lies between licentiousness and insensibility, generosity between avarice and prodigality. Magnificence is the mean between pettiness and vulgarity, magnanimity between pusillanimity and vanity. Proper ambition lies between unambitiousness and empty ambition. Patience between lack of spirit and irascibility. Truthfulness between understatement and boastfulness. Wittiness between boorishness and buffoonery. Friendliness between rudeness and ingratiation. Modesty between shamelessness and shyness. And finally, righteous indignation is the golden mean between spitefulness and envy. Let's take the virtue of courage to illustrate how the ethical virtues arise according to Aristotle and what role practical wisdom plays in this. Let's imagine the following situation. 3 young people harass and insult an elderly man on the subway. What would be the right, virtuous thing to do in this situation? In this situation, we need the virtue of courage. This virtue is the golden mean between the 2 extremes of cowardice and rashness. Practical wisdom should now help us to act correctly despite our affects. We need more background information on this. Imagine it's 4 p.m., the subway is full, and you've just come back from martial arts with your 2 buddies. The brave thing to do would be to go to the young people with your buddies and ask them to leave the man alone. If they don't listen to you, you stand in front of the man to protect him. Now imagine it's night, and there are only a few people on the subway. Half of them are drunk. You are also traveling alone. The brave thing to do now would be to speak to the sober passengers and, together with them, ask the young people to leave the man alone from a safe distance. If they don't leave him alone, you call the police. Now imagine you are 85 years old, it is night, and you are alone on the subway. Apart from you, there are only 2 other drunk men in the compartment. The brave thing to do would be to press the emergency button on the train as inconspicuously as possible or call the police. As you can see from this example, it is not so easy to strike the right balance and act correctly in a specific situation. In order to assess the situation correctly and act against his affects, man needs reason, more precisely, practical wisdom. According to Aristotle, a virtuous person is one who uses his reason. If he uses pure reason, he develops the dianoetic intellectual virtues. One of these dianoetic virtues, practical wisdom, is responsible for right action. For Aristotle, this right action always has the character of a golden mean between 2 wrong extremes. Once a person has become accustomed to acting correctly, that is, has developed a correct attitude, an ethical virtue, then practical wisdom is no longer necessary for correct action. People then automatically act correctly or virtuously. The dianoetic virtue of practical wisdom can thus be transformed into various ethical virtues through practice and habituation.